Wasteland Weaponistics Episode 16. This episode will cover the Armalite rifle family. Any rifle in the Fallout universe that is derived from the AR-10 or AR-15 will be included in this episode. However, I'm not going to include guns based on the AR-180. While the AR-15 and AR-180 are very similar in design, as they were both designed by the same engineers, they do work differently. So, the AR platform has been featured in Fallout Tactics, Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, Fallout New Vegas, Fallout 76, and the Fallout All Roads comic book. Here is a very summarized history of the AR platform in real life before we jump into the Fallout universe. I run a Fallout lore channel, so if you want detailed history of the AR platform in real life, there are a lot better channels for that than me. The real-world history of the AR series of rifles really starts during World War II, with the 1941 Johnson rifle. The multi-lug rotating bolt the AR platform uses is derived from patents that Melvin Johnson came up with for his rifle. In the 1950s, Eugene Stoner, James Sullivan, and others at Armalite then would put their engineering experience together and came up with the AR-10. The AR-10 is a 308/7.62 NATO caliber rifle that competed against the FN-FAL and the Springfield Armory T-44E4 to become the U.S. military's M14 and M15. It was disqualified due to an accident where the barrel exploded during military testing, almost killing the shooter. However, they continued to work on the AR-10 design, and it was adopted by several countries early on, like Portugal, Cuba, and Sudan. However, during the Cold War, it never reached the success of other early battle rifles like the FN-FAL or G3. Eventually, Western militaries moved away from the full-power rifle rounds to intermediate caliber rounds, and then the AR-15 was made by scaling down the AR-10 to 5.56. Colt then bought the design from Armalite, and soon after that, the U.S. military adopted the AR-15, starting with the Air Force. This would let the AR-15 take the world by storm, with many countries adopting it or some adaptation of the rifle. The AR-15 is now one of the most popular rifles in the world, being used by both militaries and civilians, since it is such a light, versatile platform. The platform has been adapted to nearly every type of firearm, from standard-style rifles to light machine guns, long-range sniper rifles, submachine guns, and even a black powder muzzleloading variant. The AR platform in real life has had a lot of success, but how does that translate into the Fallout universe? Well, not exactly an amazing track record, to be honest. It is not in any mainline Fallout game, and only appears in spin-offs. Let's go over what is non-canon first. This would be Fallout Brotherhood of Steel and the Atomic Shop from Fallout 76. Emil Pagliarulo, sorry if I said his name wrong, is a lead writer at Bethesda, and he recently gave an interview in August of 2020 where he mentioned the canonicity of the Atomic Shop, the Creation Club, the Fallout Bible, and Fallout Tactics. So, according to him, Fallout Tactics, the Creation Club, and the Fallout Bible are semi-canon, meaning stuff from these sources might be referenced in future Fallout games, but the entirety of them is not canon and can be retconned or contradicted. Whereas the Atomic Shop is not canon, because if it adhered to only canon, that would prevent them from adding things that they think would be a fun item to be in the game. In Fallout 76, there are two skins for the handmade rifle that turned it into a kind of AR-15/AR-10 hybrid. One is known as the Screaming Eagle skin. There is also another skin that is a reward from the Season 2 of the Scoreboard Armor Ace, called Tropic Lightning. These skins are heavily based on early AR-10s, but fire the 5.56 round instead of a 308. There are more differences in the design than that. Like, there is a left-side charging handle, as this has to be there to match up with the Handmaid's animation, as the Handmaid is basically a left side charging AK. The name of these skins are references to real-world military units. The Screaming Eagles are a name given to the 101st Airborne of the U.S. military. The name is also used by several sports teams and the G.I. Joe spin-off series Sergeant Savage and his Screaming Eagles. The description of the skin reads, "Defend this land from communist invaders with the Screaming Eagle skin for the handmade." The other skin's name is Tropic Lightning. Tropic Lightning is a reference to the 25th Infantry Division of the U.S. Army, a unit specialized in tropic and jungle warfare. Description of this skin reads, "Prepare for covert battle with the Tropic Lightning's camo skin for the handmade." The other non-canon appearance is in Fallout Brotherhood of Steel. In this game, we see a rare variant of the AR platform. While this might look like a normal AR-15 to some, it's not, as it's actually based on an early version of the ZM Weapons LR300. An early 2000s variant of the AR-15 with a very strange gas system called Delayed Impingement Gas System. This gas system allowed the gun to have a folding stock, as the AR buffer tube was no longer needed. It is one of the few early AR-15 variants that is able to have a folding stock. This rifle would eventually become the Para-Ordnance TTR rifle. This gun was extremely expensive for an AR pattern rifle, as it cost as much, if not more, than a Bushmaster ACR. So in-game, the rifle is just called Assault Rifle. This is very fitting for the Fallout universe to not give guns proper designations. The LR300 is a late-game weapon only found inside the secret vault located in Texas. It fires in 3-round bursts. Moving past the non-canon works of the Fallout universe, we move into the semi-canon, with Fallout Tactics. Here we find the M16A1. The description of the rifle reads as follows. The M16A1 was the chief rifle used by the U.S. Marines during the start of the 21st century, and was later to be replaced by the M4 Carbine, composed of durable aluminum alloy and hardy plastic. So, according to Fallout Tactics, the Vietnam-era M16A1 was still being used by Marines all the way up to the early 2000s, where in our timeline, the Marines adopted the M16A2 in the 1980s, where the M4 Carbine was adopted in the 1990s, where it seems in the Fallout universe it wasn't adopted until 10-15 years later. In the Fallout Tactics Midwest Wasteland, you can find the M16A1 in a variety of places and used by several factions. The Midwest Brotherhood of Steel heavily uses these rifles, as well as the Calculator's humanoid robots are seen using the M16A1. The humanoid robots of the Calculator are not like other Fallout robots, who usually are equipped with onboard weapons. Instead, these robots are able to use nearly every weapon that a human can. We now move into canon with Fallout New Vegas and All Roads. If you never heard of All Roads, it is a tie-in comic book written by Chris Avallone and drawn by artists at Dark Horse Comics. It is one of the few pieces of media for Fallout that isn't a video game. In the comic book, we see what looks like an M16 or M16A1 being used by both the Great Khans and the Fiends. The style of the artist makes it kind of hard to tell what exactly it is, but it has a triangular fore end and is clearly all black. This is strange, as this version of the rifle doesn't appear in Fallout New Vegas, as the service rifle we have in Fallout New Vegas has brown woodstock parts rather than the black depicted in the comic book. We could chalk this up to being a mistake on the colorist part, as there is another mistake in this comic book. That being, the NCR is shown using horse-mounted cavalry. Horses are supposed to be extinct in the Fallout universe, yet Dark Horse Comics added them back into the lore with this book. In Fallout New Vegas, we see several AR-15 variants. The most prevalent is the service rifle, a early-style AR with wooden stock parts, and limited to semi-auto only. The service rifle is a very confusing gun. Josh Sawyer confirmed that the gun is pre-war, but he didn't confirm if it was used by the US military or not, and that's kind of a hard thing to answer here. We do know a version of the service rifle was definitely used by the military. The survivalist rifle we find in the Honest Hearts DLC clearly belonged to the military because on the receiver there is markings. Property of US government, Checkpoint Carbine 12.7mm cal. It could be that the pre-war service rifle was sold to civilians, with the US military later adopting the Checkpoint Carbine version during the unrest of the pre-war period and the US annexation of Canada. The survivalist rifle is clearly meant for troops stationed at checkpoints and is modeled after a 50 Beowulf chambered AR. The 50 Beowulf round in real life was meant to be used against engine blocks of cars and other civilian vehicles. There are two other AR variants found in Fallout New Vegas' Mojave Wasteland: the Assault Carbine and the Marksman Carbine. These versions are much closer to real-world variants. The Assault Carbine is pretty much a 1990s M4 carbine. However, there's one strange thing about the Assault Carbine. While the Service Rifle and Marksman Carbine both fire 5.56, the Assault Carbine fires the 5mm round, usually reserved for the minigun. Now, we actually know why this is, as Josh Sawyer answered a question about this. Some of the decisions I made about how to divide up the calibers by weapons were based on the rate of fire and scarcity/access. Most of the 5.56 weapons have a relatively low rate of fire compared to the Assault Carbine and minigun. The one exception to this is the light machine gun. 5mm is only used by the Assault Carbine and the minigun, exclusively high rate of fire weapons in the late game. Weapons firing 5.56 tend to do significantly more damage per shot as well. The LMG does 21 base damage per shot compared to the minigun's 12. In general, I tried to keep the damage done by conventional ammo type within a relatively tight band, usually justifying higher damage values by a longer barrel. The 357 Magnum revolver does 26 base damage versus the Cowboy Repeater's 32 base damage. I didn't want to have 5.56 doing an enormous damage range across the weapons that used it. As for the design of the Assault Carbine being different, it's largely a production concern. Basing the Assault Carbine on the Service Rifle made it easier for us to fit it into our schedule. The truly unique weapons like the 12.7mm SMG, Silence 22 SMG were much more expensive. The 12.7mm SMG and that gun /5.56 revolver were both really expensive because they involved concepting and mechanical problem solving. The Assault Carbine is essentially an M4. After that very long quote, that is why the Assault Carbine fires 5mm from a gameplay perspective. Then we have the Marksman Carbine. The Marksman Carbine is much more customized, featuring a Magpul style stock and an ARMS SIR handguard with an ACOG scope. Josh Sawyer said it's loosely based on some paratrooper-oriented marksman rifles I saw online. It and the Assault Carbine are present due to New Vegas' proximity to the Nellis Air Force Base. So this basically confirms that these versions of the AR were used by the military. For post-war use of these rifles, we see multiple factions equipped with them. The NCR seems to issue as many of these as possible to all of its units, with the standard service rifle being used by infantry and the Assault Carbine and Marksman Carbine being used by more special forces types of units. We also see these rifles being used by the Legion. While they're not as prevalent among Legion forces as the NCR, they can be seen being used during very large or important battles, like when the Legion attacks Bitter Springs or the Battle for Hoover Dam. Some high-ranking fiends, like Duke, carry one. Also, despite all roads showing at least one Great Khan member with a service rifle, I couldn't find any that used one in-game. They seem to be usually armed with submachine guns. Service rifles can also be seen being used by several civilians. One thing to note about the design of all ARs in Fallout New Vegas is that they don't have a standard T-shaped rear charging handle. They for some reason have a charging handle directly attached to the bolt. Why this decision was made from both a gameplay design reason and a lore reason, I don't know. My guess would be their animation rig at the time couldn't do the standard style of AR charging handle. Well, a lore reason, maybe it's the designers just like the side charging handle more than the T-shaped charging handle, as ARs set up like this do exist in real life. For unique versions of the ARs in the Fallout universe, there are two. We went over one of them earlier with the Survivalist Rifle, a version of the service rifle that fires the much larger 12.7mm rounds. We learned that this particular rifle belonged to a U.S. Army soldier and survivalist named Randall Clark. If you would like to know more about Randall Clark, there are far better channels for that than me. The Survivalist Rifle features the French word for stop or halt on it. I think it's pronounced arret or array. The other is a version of the Marksman Carbine called the All-American. It has a special skin on it depicting the 82nd Airborne. We find the All-American in the ghoul-infested Vault 34 just laying on the floor of the armory. This is rather strange because if it was issued to members of the 82nd Airborne, why is there only one? And why is this special rifle in the armory of a vault? It seems to me that this is more of a tribute rifle than something that was issued. Tribute rifles in real life show up every now and then, and they're dedicated to a person, a military unit, or maybe a specific battle. Josh Sawyer came up with the design. It bears the name All-American because the 82nd Airborne is known as the All-American Division because it is made up of soldiers from every state. Despite the air platform being extremely popular in real life, it does not seem to play as big of a role in the Fallout universe. While adopted by the military, it was replaced very quickly by both the M199 and R91, with those later being replaced by energy weapons. As always, subscribe to this channel as well as my main channel, Trooper Fofo. See everybody later.